Let's create an AWS Lambda function. This is one of the so-called serverless functions. We'll go ahead and get started by going to AWS. I'm going to go ahead and enter the address here. I'm then going to sign in to the console. I will then select from my services Lambda in the compute section. And since this is the first time I'm creating one, I'll go ahead and click on Get Started Now. And yes, you can see there's a number of templates. For this example, we're simply going to do the hello world. And as you can see here, there's already a little template that we can use. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And I will skip over creating triggers. We will come back to that after we've done the basic example. So I'll go ahead and click Next. I'll give my function a name. I'll call it Batman for now. I'm going to choose my runtime. I'm going to go ahead and choose the latest version of Node to execute. And as you can see here, we can choose a number of ways to enter our code. There's even a CLI that you can download and run your command line within your machine. But in this case, I'm simply going to edit here within the web page. So as you can see here, I get a little template of what it should be. I'm going to go ahead and delete the code that's there. We get a handler for the event when this function is called, and it takes an event, context, and a callback. You can use the callback to return your output to the requesting client. So I'm going to go ahead and simply create a random number here. I'm going to define a variable called number, and I will round off the random number using the math.floor function. Inside of it, I will make a call to the random number, to the random function within the library. And I'm going to create a number between 1 and 10,000, as you can see there. Now, once I have that number, I'm simply going to return it here on the callback. So I will enter number, and that's all that we will do for this small function. We generate a random number and then we return it using the callback. Now I'm going to go ahead and scroll back. There's a few more things that we need to enter. The very first thing that we need to define is the handler. .file, the default file is the index file, and in this case we're going to use the handler using the same naming that was already provided, which is handler. We're then going to create a new role. We're going to create a role from a template. And then I'm going to go ahead and give it a name. I will give it here Batman role, just so I know which one it is. And then I will select a policy for the template. I'm going to use the simple microservices service permission. And then we will use the given defaults for the rest of the categories. I will then click on Next. There's simply a confirmation of the settings that we entered, and I will click on Create Function. As you can see there, we've been successful. We get a congratulations, your function has been created. I'm now going to go ahead and execute that function, pressing on the blue button here. And as you can see there, we got some output. The number is 2961. If I go ahead and run it again, you can see there that we get 4872, 5066, and so on. Random numbers between 1 and 1000. So I'm going to go ahead now and configure the permissions so that we can execute this function externally. In order to do that, I need to go back to the console, and I'm going to select Application Services, the API Gateway. I'm going to define a new API. And as you can see there, since this is the first time, I click on the Get Started button, and it's telling me here that I have some pre-populated examples that I could use, but I'm simply going to create a new API. I'm going to give it here the Batman API name, and I'm going to skip a description. I'm going to go ahead and create an API, And as you can see there, now we have an API that, the skeleton of an API that we can start to fill out. In the following steps, we will create a resource, then a method, then we will deploy the API. So in order to do that, we can simply use the Actions button here, and we will create a resource. So you can see here, it requests a resource name. I would call it bat resource. And as you can see there, I'm going to use the same for the resource path. I'm going to go ahead and create the resource. Next, I will create a method. Once again, I go back to the Actions button, create method. In this case, we're going to use the get verb. Once it appears, we're going to go ahead and click on the check OK. And here we will select our integration type. In this case, we're going to use a Lambda function. And the region that we're going to be using is US East. And the next field is simply the name of our Lambda function. In this case, if you remember, it is Batman. I'm going to go ahead and save. And the system will ask me to confirm that I want to open up the permissions for this Lambda function. And we want to do that, so I will go ahead and click on OK. And as you can see here, we get an outline or a graphical representation of what's being done from the API method request, the integration request, all the way to the execution of the Lambda function called Batman. We then get the integration response and a method that responds to the client. Now, as I mentioned previously, our next step is to deploy the API. So we go back to our actions and we move down to deploy API. We will get here the question of a deployment stage. We're going to create a new stage. We'll call it here simply prod for production. And we'll leave the description and deployment empty. So as you can see there, that has been created. Now, in order to get the full URL, I'll click on prod for production here. Go ahead and open that up. Then on get. And as you can see here, this is the URL to invoke. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And as you can see there, let me go ahead and make my font bigger. I have a random number. I'm going to go ahead and reload. And if I call that every single time, we'll get a new number, again, between 0 and 5,000. So this is a bare bones example on how to create a serverless function called Lambda on AWS. So with that, I'll say goodbye.